Hi everyone, this is Leonard Bartosek speaking. This is the second episode of my lecture series Collective Utopia, Heaven on Earth. Last week at the same time I was giving you an introduction, trying to lay out an overview, a landscape about the different topics and the structure of the book project. For this reason I have this chart here to give you some insights about the main topics that I'm going to speak about in the text. And if you want to have a broader idea of what this whole project is about, I suggest you to go back to episode 1 and watch the first 15 minutes of the episode to get familiar with the whole thing. And without further ado, I just jump into the text as such. Which starts with the second preface, written on December the 9th, 2021. So more than 2 months after the first preface. This is a preface that I wrote after I finished the book, basically going back and reflecting on how the whole text evolved. After I finish the text, you have the opportunity to write a question in the chat function. I'm going to read it and I try to answer your question if you have any. Second preface, December the 9th, 2021, the structure of the project. As you can see from the dates, I wrote the first preface at the beginning of my journey through the landscapes of nature and soul here on the northern coast of Sicily. The second preface I'm writing now after I have finished writing the book by and large. What has emerged is a very intuitive stream of ideas, all loosely connected to the basic intent and the 3 thematic pillars on which the book is built: the status quo, collective utopia, and the spiritual dimension of these 2 poles. Contrary to my original concept, it has become a very personal book, which is also formally reflected in the fact that it has become a kind of diary at the same time. In this immense, beautiful nature, so many observations have imposed themselves on me that they have flowed into the text as if all by themselves. The external phenomena have connected with my view inward, and a very intensive interaction has arisen, which has fertilized each other. Paradoxically, just in this peaceful seclusion of the daily being surrounded by the most beautiful nature, also inner psychological veils have been lifted and mental abysses have opened up, which represent a revelation for me and have brought me into contact with the core of my own limitations and problems in my life. And after these intense weeks of reflection, I have learned some things about myself that lay an important foundation for my future personal progress. The root of many of my own problems in my life is one that is at the same time one of enormous relevance to very many, if not most, modern people today, and that is a deep lack of sense of self-worth. I will talk about the spiritual implications and the loss of the religious in general, but the immediate expression of the inner emptiness of modern man is a deep-rooted lack of self-worth. And why? In simple terms, because in our economic system our value is measured by the amount of money with which our work is valued. That is, my inviolable value as a human being, independent of my performance, is taken away from me and reduced to my work performance. The price tag that is hung around my neck, however, does not necessarily reflect my performance itself, but rather a certain closeness or a lack of closeness to power, and how much I myself am willing and able to serve the system as a whole. However, this in turn means that if I'm someone who earns a lot of money in our system, this too is not an expression of a high value of my person, but simply an expression of being useful to the system as a whole. That is, my value is tied to the system and to the status quo. I'm thus highly dependent on the system and the maintenance of the system. The total commodification of our activities and our relationships today means a permanent degradation and devaluation of the human being. In addition to our monetary compensation for our work, today we are only worth as much as how many likes we get on Instagram. This logic of marketing ourselves 24/7 today and trying to increase our market value makes us mentally ill and reinforces our chronic lack of self-worth. This lack of self-worth drives our modern addictions, which in turn drive our entire economic system. A vicious circle that consumes more and more soul and natural resources. This system, which makes us sick inside, is a dysfunctional system, and we should do everything we can do to transcend and overcome it. Going beyond our spiritual self-interest, overcoming this system today has taken on a truly existential significance and urgency. For it is this very system and its destructive dynamics that are today in the process of destroying not only our souls, but the entire planet to boot. The intention of this project is to shed light on this system, the status quo, to understand it and to show perspectives to overcome it. These two poles, the status quo on one side and a collective utopia of another world on the other side, are held together by the third pillar, namely the spiritual dimension of these two poles. Inextricably linked to the status quo today is a deep spiritual crisis, and therefore a possible solution for an alternative utopia should also integrate the spiritual dimension of a possible healing as the basis for this utopia. This is a very multi-layered and complex task that everyone should solve in their own individual way, and at the same time we need a unifying collective conversation about it to find and bring together the connecting threads and the lowest common denominators. On this basis, we can then form a powerful network to point out and follow radically new paths together. With my project, I'm trying to do no more and no less than to map out these important issues, to stimulate discussion about them, and to form and bring together networks of people who are ready to shed the status quo and embark on the adventure of a truly just future. The structure of this book reflects my aspiration for this dialogue to succeed. And so structurally, this project is set up in the following way. At the center is the text of this book as a coordinate system for dialogue with readers. This text is communicated and bundled through 3 different channels. This is to allow different people to enter the subject areas differently as they wish and to interact in different ways. The book is published as a blog. For this closed blog, one can purchase access. By doing so, you create a user account under your real name. Now you can read the text and comment below each entry. All users can rate the comments and upvote in this way. The best rated comments move to the top and will also be included in the print version of the book. Each user will share in the profits for a comment that is published in the print version based on the number of words. In addition, all users, including myself, equally decide how the profit is divided proportionally between the author, the group of user comments, and the publisher. I'm very likely to use the platform Substack for this attempt, but I will let you know as soon as possible. Secondly, the book will be published as a printed book. This will allow us to reach a wider range of people who may first be inspired by the ideas and may not yet want to interact so actively. With the help of a well-positioned publisher, this holds the chance of a higher level of visibility as well as potentially substantial success, including in monetary terms. The profit will be determined in a collective way with the help of an online vote of all blog users and divided accordingly between the author, user comments, and the publisher. An update of the latest user comments will also be printed in each new edition. The third channel, which is actually the first because I'm starting now with this YouTube channel, this text will be published on YouTube as a text read aloud by the author. In fact, each daily entry will be a live episode followed by a live question and answer session. Question will be asked via the common chat function. Every week a live episode will be published. In this way we will reach another audience, one that is more likely to be on video platforms. Through the regular frequency, we will gradually build up a regular audience, sensitize them to the topic, and also cause some of them to join the blog or buy the print version. All daily entries together already add up to the content of more than a year. In this way, the basic prerequisite for a successful video channel is already guaranteed, namely continuity. Since the underlying theme is global and many innovative approaches also come from the Anglo-American, Indian and Southern American regions, all three channels, the blog, the book and the video channel, will appear in English as well as German. I'm trying to set up the project in such a way that it can be successful in the long term, including financially. The key point is that I'm decoupling the monetary decision-making power that normally comes with being at the top of a hierarchy and distributing it radically horizontally to all users. I want to earn a lot of money with the project, but not for myself alone, but for all participants. Hence, this collective distribution key. It may seem a contradiction that on the one hand I lament the total commodification of our activities and relationships today, and at the same time take this commodification to the extreme by offering every user the prospect of being able to earn money with every single word written. And indeed, in heaven on earth, we would have completely overcome and abolished the logic of money and money in general. However, we must somehow get from A to B and can socially only pick us up where we are. And this means paradoxically that we first put the all-encompassing dominance of money in the center, and in the first step radically democratically cancel out the tendency of money to accumulate in the hands of a few. If this succeeds, we will develop a different basis of trust for sustainable cooperation, in which the dominance of money can be pushed back peu à peu. That is, we must finally think radically about distributive justice and the question of power. Coupled with money, we must paradoxically put money at the center in order to ultimately overcome money. My personal relationship with money is a complicated one, and in my text I try to reveal all the different layers that determine this relationship. In doing so, I place historical, conceptual, spiritual and personal psychological aspects equally in the balance in order to find and put up for discussion an empowering way of dealing with money and the fact of money's dependence and dominance today. The topic of money can perhaps be seen as exemplary for the working off of a concrete topic as a methodology of truth-finding in this book. In the intuitive writing process, surrounded in the meditative silence and the breathtaking beauty of nature, this theme pushes forward in different directions and pores. From overall social considerations to the radical self-exploration of early childhood experiences, the theme traverses different layers and levels. Besides the macro perspective, or the attempt to take a macro societal meta level, the process of relentless self-grounding is just as, or perhaps even more important. To stay with the topic of money as an example, you will learn, for example, that through various experiences and imprints, my personal relationship to money has changed radically several times in the course of my life. As a child, I was downright horny for money and acquired various techniques to get hold of as much money as possible. Specializing in finding money in the most hidden places or selling bulky waste at extortionate prices, or immediately crossing the border of the legal in stealing banknotes from my mother's purse. As a teenager, I did a 180-degree turn and declared money to be morally reprehensible in general and created a kind of anti-money identity, which in part still has an effect today. As we will see, however, this has little to do with a genuine inner detachment from the material. I'm not exactly the Francis of Assisi of the 21st century, but rather an artificial identity construction based on arrogant demarcation from average people driven by money. As a freelance professional musician, the subject of money then became one that was given more and more by a chronic lack, because I constantly earned too little money. The reason for this is rooted in a structural reality of my profession on the one hand, and on the other hand in my personal identity as a money despiser, and equally fundamentally rooted in the gross lack of self-worth already mentioned. As you can see, it is a multi-layer field in which social, historical, systemic, spiritual, and personal psychological areas overlap. I have now picked out the subject of money as an example in the preface to give you an impression of the way in which I approach such a complex subject in the book. In the process, the various areas are touched upon and thematized, but never finally forced into a coherent, hermetically sealed thesis, but quite the opposite. Enough blanks and questions are left open and liquefied so that readers, users into the subject itself, can form their own thoughts and possibly write appropriate comments. I'm very grateful for the opportunity over the many weeks in the most beautiful place I know in this world to turn to these topics, the wonderful nature and my own soul landscapes and abysses. This was made possible by the generous support of my wife, my mother-in-law, my parents, and a grant from the German government. The foundation for this book was laid almost exactly 40 years ago. At the time I was born, at the same time Tullio created his stone park here in Scobello, and the course was set by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan for the neoliberalism that has spread globally in my lifetime over the last 40 years. 40 years after Thatcher's "there is no alternative" mantra, that credo has turned into its opposite. With our system crumbling everywhere and the climate crisis growing ever more acute, we can now state the opposite. There is no alternative to an alternative. And that is what this book is about. the search for an alternative, which must be a collective, radically democratic one, if it is not to be automatically some variety of totalitarianism again this time. Next to the current totalitarian biopolitics, the emerging eco-fascism is the greatest threat to a change that aims at a real inner spiritual and sustainable transformation, at the realization of universal human rights. We have to deal with the impending apocalypse, even accept and affirm it as inevitable, in order not to run into the dangerous dead end of totalitarianism. This realization is also an unexpected one for me, one that had revealed itself to me in the course of the writing process. Heaven on earth is possible, but it will only become possible by living through the apocalypse. Apocalypse in Greek means unveiling, and so we should also relate positively to the coming change. The veil will be lifted, and behind it stands another, a deeper, a more loving consciousness, a human being who will become one with his divine nature. Accompany me on this journey through the unfathomable beauties of nature in Sicily, through the realms of destruction by alienated men, to the root of one's own inability and pain, to the dreaming of the full potential of man as an individual and in community. I am happy if you read these lines and they make you think, and I'm happy if you feel and follow the impulse to enter actively into the discussion. As human beings, we are social beings, and our inner wealth is determined by the quality of our relationships. Therefore, it is time to put this wealth at the center of our reflections and our actions. And we can only do this together. So I invite you, build with us on Heaven on Earth, become part of a collective utopia. So this was the second preface. The episode ends at this point. Now you have the chance to ask a question in the chat function. I'm going to look up, as I'm at the very beginning of this project, I have still very few viewers, so I will see, double check if maybe somebody is writing something. And if not so, no problem, I will end at that point. Also, about 24 hours after the live stream, the video is going to pop up in my video feed, and you can also afterwards write a comment. So I think there is nobody writing at that point. Give you a few moments to change your mind and maybe write in something. And if not so, I will see you next week again at the same time, more or less. I publish a few days in advance. I publish the notification for the exact time of the live stream. All right, then see you next week.